Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 4 in the discourse Vaydaber Moshe Roshei Hamatois, which is the 10th discourse in the great big book, B'Shosh Ekdimu 5672, and this is the 4th class, also in chapter 37. Okay, so we've been learning in the last class how there is a differentiation of higher and lower, and the differentiation of higher or lower that exists in the spheros and the attributes, and also we're going to continue also in the worlds. And by the way, worlds and attributes always align one with each other, because as the attributes line up, one higher than the next, one comes before the other and one comes behind the other. That also is the root of the differentiation of the various different worlds, because in each world there is another attribute of the divine attribute that is dominant in that world. For example, the highest world is equivalent and dominated by the energy of Chachma, although it has all the other 10 attributes in it, the world of Atzilus, but its primary overwhelming experience is an experience of Chachma, which carries through all the attributes all the way into the Malchus. It's still dominated by the experience of Chachma. The world of Bina, the world of Bria, which is the world already of creation, is equivalent and dominated by the primary feature of that world is the Bina. It's a very intellectual world. It's an understanding, a world of incredible understanding. So the Bina element is highlighted and pronounced and bold in that world, and everything else that is contained in that world, the Chachma of that world, and also the lower attributes, the emotions and the speech and the expression and all that, is all swallowed up in the Bina. And so is in the next world, which is the world of emotions, which corresponds to the world of Yetzirah. And so therefore the two of them always work at least in as much as we're speaking about over here, that there is a higher and a lower. And in the worlds and in the spheros, and he's explaining over here what establishes the higher and the lower of the worlds and of the spheros is that the more energy, the higher it is, the closer it is to the beginning of the kav, like we spoke earlier, it's receiving from a higher point of the kav, closer to the source from where the kav is coming from, there is more light, and then as we go down, the light gets diminished, the vessels become more pronounced, and the light becomes less. And remember, in the last Maayor, in chapter Maayor number 9, we had a whole discussion. Where is the what's causing what? Is it the chicken or the egg? What's causing what? Is the measurement really the measurement of the vessels? Where there are thicker vessels, more dense, where the experience of that particular sphere or world is with thicker vessels, and that forces the light to become less, or it works the opposite. When the light decided, based on the light itself, that the light becomes measured, like remember we learned in the end of last class, not in the last class, in the last Maayor, when the kav is called kav hamodeh, that has an inyan of medida, it has an inyan of measuring, when it measures itself, it self-limits, so it brings forth a vessel that doesn't need a lot of light, that needs less light. It's commensurate, lights and vessels. Okay, so that's the subject we were learning, and here's the thing: this whole differentiation between all the hischalkos, all the divisions that there are, all this creates a pluralization, multi-layers, and so on and so forth. All of this happens when the lights interact with the vessels. But however, let's remember, and all of this can happen only because the light from the very get-go is an Or Pnimi. It's not the Or Ein Sof as it is for itself. I'm swinging back all the way to the main theme that we shouldn't forget. The main theme that we've been learning in the whole discourse is that the light of the kav is not just pure Or Ein Sof. Even though the light of the kav is a reinsertion of the Or Ein Sof, but it's Or Ein Sof B, not Or Ein Sof A. Remember that. That's the whole point over here. It's in the Or Ein Sof. There's the lower level of the Or Ein Sof. That's whatever you call me, in a lower level. There's an element in the Or Ein Sof that has esespheres agnuzos, which means it has already the subtle, impossible to understand how subtle. It has already the nuances of the variations of different spheres. Remember, we spoke first it's spheres in Kates, and then it becomes individual 10 spheres, whatever it is. But these 10 spheres, as they go into the kav, there is already an element of 10. But, however, this is very important. Before they go into the Kav, you don't hear yet the differentiation of them. And therefore, there is also no higher and lower. Although there is 10, but there's no higher and lower. They're all equal. The Chachma on this level and the Malchus of that level are all equal because they're all in the state where there's not yet, there's nothing to differentiate them. When they go into vessels, that's when they line up in a system of higher and lower, and they also position themselves that the Chachma gives birth to the Bina gives birth to the Das, and the Das gives birth to the Chachma, Bina, and Das give birth to the Chesed, the Gevurah, the Tiferet. They evolve one from each other, the Midot, and finally the Malchus, but that's when they are emerging into vessels. But why is it that way? That they emerge into the vessels and then they become an evolution and a higher and a lower, which is differentiated by more light and less light. That's because in the Oyer itself there is already 10 spheres. Okay, that's always, let's remember that in the background. Now we're going to go back to the main theme of this chapter. So in this chapter, he was showing us what's this idea, what makes higher and lower in the world. What really makes higher and lower in the spheres and in the worlds is the fact where there is more light, that's called higher, and where there is less light, it's called lower. And he showed us both in the Kochas HaNefesh, which means in our own human experience, and also in the cosmic energy from above, that Chachma has a lot of light, and like it brings an Eitz Chaim that in the spheres of Chachma, the light is Meir B'kiruv Makom, it's Meir in a place of closeness. Like we experience by us, when we have an epiphany, there's a whole lot of light there, very little vessel, hardly any words, just a lot of light, blinding light that hits us when we have a creative moment, a moment of a pure light shining in our inner being lights up, the powerful light, and we don't feel ourselves when that light comes in. In the Bina experience, we learn the light is shining both by ourselves and in the great cosmic Bina. The light is shining, the Or Ein Sof is shining from a distance. In our own soul, it means that the Nefesh, the light of the pure soul, is more diminished and it's lighting from a distance. Some light is coming into the Bina experience, but it's already a diminished light because you're feeling much more the definitions of one's own mind, the definitions of the concept, not the light of the concept, but the definitions of the concept, the limitations of the concept, the shape and the form of the concept, not the soul of the concept. And that's in Bina. And then when the Bina gives birth to the emotions, then you're entering into already the light is already going through a window, and you have walls built around. What's the world? The walls in our case would be the walls of self. Now you're already you're in the narrow constriction of the self. When I mean to say of the self, I mean the limited self, the self of the vessel of the body, a limited self, and that's where the emotions, how the person feels as a self, and in that self there is already some of that initial light is shining into the emotions, but it's coming through a window because, as we said, every emotion has to have some form of intelligence that's backing it. So the intelligence, which is the Bina is called the mother of the emotions, creates the emotions. And not only the Bina is a cause of the emotions, but the Bina carries into the emotion. Every emotion, the emotion itself has an intelligence in the emotion. However, as we learned in last class, it's only the summary of the emotion, of the intelligence. It's not the whole deep richness of the intelligence, where there is a lot of light, but rather all diminished light, like we learned in the Psaktin of a Mishnah. When the Mishnah, which is all about the emotions of God, are inside, hidden in the Mishnah, is a general leftover summary of the great expansive discussion of the Talmud, which is the background information which leads to this particular emotion. And in the human experience as well, whenever we experience the emotion, there is some leftover of the intellectual experience that produced the emotion. However, as we discussed earlier, that when you are deeply involved in the intellectual experience, you can't feel the emotion because there's too much light there to feel self. The light has to go away. You can't feel anymore the richness of whatever it is that you're thinking about, whatever it is that your emotion is going to get excited. Everything you came to know in your intellect. the expansiveness of it, the fullness of it, the richness of it, we might say, has to be out of your mind, because you have to feel yourself, how you feel about it. However, you have to have a general attitude. What's your general attitude? You still have a memory that which I've experienced, it was so delicious. So therefore, I'm excited about it. Until you don't step away from the richness of the intellect, you can't even experience an emotion. So the emotions are a far more constricted, limited, and more vessel type experience. And in it, there is some of the bina is extending into the emotions, and inside that bina is a kernel and a tiny bit of the chachma, which the chachma is the pure light, the expansive light, the pure light, where there is no vessels or hardly any vessel. So we're watching. Take a look. We're watching how the light is getting diminished as it's moving further down into thicker vessels, which is the journey from chachma to bina into the emotions. And now finally, the last stage is when you're now taking this emotion that you're feeling and you're going to express it in speech. So then what you're doing is you're creating tiny vessels and putting the emotion, how you feel into the words. That's already small, narrow containers. Over there, only a tidbit of the emotion can make its way into the vessel, into the speech. And that's the meaning that it's coming through a crack. That's why he's going to say, we're going to learn about it today, that when you speak, if your emotions are really rallied up, if you're very, very angry or experiencing a very deep, overwhelming emotion, then you're silent. You have ever experienced you're close to someone, I don't know, your wife, and you can tell in her face that she's so upset she's not even talking, then you know you're in big trouble, right? If she's talking, then it's okay. If she's not talking, she's just giving you the stare. Oh my goodness. You know you're done, right? Because the emotion is just too intense. So, but now that she's upset, she's talking about it, that's already a sign that the intensity of the emotions subsided, and you can communicate. So what that is showing you is that how only a trickle of the emotion goes into the speech. And now we're going to learn now, which is the last point we were learning last week, is when we say emotion goes into speech, there's two levels in it. There's a deeper level, a more powerful level, where you're actually trying to communicate the emotion into the speech. That means you're speaking words of love, like he says. You're going to communicate your emotion into the actual speech itself. And over there, the rule also applies that the emotion has to be only sometimes it says only a tenth of the emotion can go into the speech. A little bit of it. Or there is a lesser type of a speech, which is also bound up with emotion, but on a much lesser level, where it's not even that. It's not, the emotion is not even being packed into the speech. You're not even infusing the emotion into the speech, but the emotion is a cause to the speech. And that is related to the idea that if you love someone, you like talking to them. It doesn't have to be a love, a passionate, fiery love that you're in love with them, but you enjoy the presence of this human being and you talk to them. If there is no love, and for sure if there is somebody you dislike, you don't talk to them. So the speech is being powered by a background of love. And over them, for sure, very little of the emotion is we would say a crumb of the emotion is actually in the words. And the person might not even feel that you're loving them, but they feel attached, a light attachment. And the fact that you're talking to them makes them feel good, because they can feel a background of love. Really, in a sense, we should at least have that minimal love to every Jew. And Avos Yisroel is you should be able to talk to anybody. It's cold and unacceptable to be sitting at anywhere, at a simcha, at a restaurant, on a subway, on an airplane, or in a shul, and there's someone sitting next to you, and you don't take the moment to say hi, how are you? what's your name? Shalom Aleichem. My name is so and so. That's the bare minimum Avos Yisrael, love that we should have to every Jew. Is that, and if we love someone, we connect. The connection is there. You're Jewish, and it's not in the Maayor. I'm just that's it. Coldly is a disconnect. We should never feel that way to anybody. Always, at least. In any case, let's learn. So, Ubemalchus, let's go back to the words over here. Ubemalchus. So there's a little summary on a lot of what we learned. So I think it was good. Now we go back. Ubemalchus, and in Malchus, we're holding in the end of chapter 37, not all the way in the end, about a quarter left in chapter 37. Ubemalchus, and in Malchus, or derech nekav leva. And in Malchus, the light comes through a hole. He's going to give the two examples of speech. A speech when you are actually transmitting love to someone. You're telling someone, I love you. Or you're speaking other words of praise and love to this individual. One way is that you're revealing your emotion in speech. An example, you're speaking words of love. Or there's a lesser case where it's also emotion driving the speech, but it's not that the emotion, the content of the speech is love. It's the fact, it's the speech itself that you're talking is an indication of love. Or that the love is the cause of the speech. Because of the love that you have to this individual, you speak with the person. So then the speech, even though the speech is not conveying, you're not pouring love into the speech, but the speech is still revealing to the person you're talking to that you love them. Again, love over here doesn't have to necessarily mean that you're madly in love. It means you feel a connection. The speech megala reveals midas ava, the element of kindness and love. Sharei asina, because we know that a hatred, hu hapach is the opposite of speech. Like it says by Yosef and the brothers, they hated him. They couldn't speak to him. Because of their hatred, they couldn't stand him. They couldn't speak. They couldn't say hello to him. I can't stand. I'm sorry. It's just it drives me insane. I'm sorry if it's been, especially in big communities. I'm not going to say, but thank God over here in LA, it's an out of town community, and most of the time you don't see this. When you walk on past someone on the street, people say hello, even Jews and Gentiles. It's nice to see that. And then there's these big cities like, I'm not going to say where. But what's really problematic is that bothers me to no end is like in big, huge Jewish communities that are not the out of town communities, people walk past each other on Shabbos, and if you say good Shabbos to them, hello to them, they look at you like you're from mother. Do I know you? Like, hey, you're probably mistaking me. You probably don't even know me. Yeah, but you're Jewish. I'm walking through you. I'm not going to say good Shabbos. Say good Shabbos to everybody. Anyways, it's just basic. That's my feeling. In any case, it's not just my feeling, it's the truth. That's the way it should be. So, Harayadibur speech megale, it reveals midas ava. Asina, because hatred, is the opposite of speech. The sages actually say what's called someone that you have a saina, you don't like him, and that there's certain laws in Torah that that sometimes we're obligated to help an individual. Sometimes we're obligated to help, and I don't think it's regarding this law. I think it's regarding another law. Again, I'm almost 100% sure it's regarding this. At first, I thought it was regarding one thing, but I think it's regarding something else. I think it's regarding the law that if someone accidentally murders someone, God forbid, kills someone, they have to run to the cities of refuge, and that's how they get their atonement. However, the verse says that you don't hate, that it's only in a case where the person does not hate the other individual. Because if they hate the other individual, then we question that it's an accident. And therefore, even though you can't punish this person by giving them capital punishment because you don't have proof that it was intentional. And there's also no witnesses. There's no warning. According, you could only give the punishment of Torah of capital punishment to a murderer only if there was an explicit warning by two witnesses before the person did the act, and in this case not. But if we assume that this person hates the other individual, then we assume that it wasn't so accidental. It was by mistake on purpose. And therefore, They don't go to we don't send them to the sitting of atonement because we don't want them to feel that they have their atonement. They don't have the atonement. They need to do a much deeper soul searching and a much deeper tshuva than just going to the cities of refuge, which is an atonement. They don't deserve that thing. How do we know if a person hates someone or not? They just say that if you ignore this individual 3 days, it's an indication. I'm obviously, there's a lot of people in the world you don't talk to for 3 days just because you didn't meet them. But if you passed this person by for 3 days and didn't say hello, that's an indication that you dislike this individual. If you didn't speak for him for 3 days. Nevertheless, so you see from there, just proving the idea that love brings people close and causes conversation, and hate causes a lack of conversation. Notwithstanding the fact that the love is what's flowing and driving the speech. However, this that the speech reveals is only a crumb of the love. Or not a crumb, but an array of the emotion. It doesn't contain, you can't, even if you're speaking words of love, you cannot convey the depth of the love in the speech. And the proof to that is when the emotions are really, really rallied up, when a person's emotions are very, very irritated or excited, and a person can't even speak, too upset to talk, or too emotional to talk. Only when the emotion calms down, a person can speak. And that's only a little bit of the emotion goes into the speech. That's why you actually see that when a person is really emotional and they're talking, then the words crack up. Then you can really, there are times you can hear when someone talks, like someone is getting up and is describing something very intense, and they're by a funeral, something like that's very, 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 and they just can't even hold their words, and they're crying, and the words are coming, and then the words that go out of the heart, they go into the heart, and you can feel that the words are saturated with emotion. But even then, it's only a tip of the iceberg, if you might say, of the emotion. I'm sure iceberg is not a good example because it's not ice, it's hot. Whatever it is, it's only a little ray of the fire. The same as in the supernal realm of Malchus, that the light shines in a constricted way and in a diminished way, only in a hole. It's coming through only. So especially if you're tracing it through all the spheres, the chachma is, the light is so overwhelming, you're lost in the infinite energy, in an energy that's just shining. In Bina, you're already taking it into your vessels, but there's still a whole lot of light. In the emotions, it's already diminished. And again, is much more of you're in your own space. You're in your own. You haven't stepped out of yourself to examine something else or something bigger than you. You're in you. But you're excited about it. You feel the energy of it inside of you, and that's where there is light. But it's coming through a window. It's no more like outside, like the sun, the shining outside. And then when you're passing it, when you're taking this emotion and passing it, putting it into a vessel of speech, of communication, this energy, this original energy, is only coming through a crack. And this is what we mean, up and low, higher and lower. Shabbat spheres, that's in the 10 spheres. Where there's a lot of light, is a quality. And where the light gets less, that's called low. Alken, and therefore, and that is the reason why the chachma and that's the reason why wisdom is called a quality to bina understanding, because in wisdom, in other words, why is chachma called Maila high, is because in chachma there's a whole lot of light, and in bina is called lower because there's less light. And now in general, the same is also the intellect in general, and is considered higher compared to the emotions because there's much less light in the emotions. However, like this. In most cases, the way the sphirot and the attributes, and we'll soon see consequently out of that, the worlds, the way they are formed and are positioned as part of the evolution of worlds. That means their normal state of revelation, how they emerge and emanate, is in this fashion, where the Chachma comes first before the Bina, and the Bina comes, and then, as we said earlier, and then, yes, then we can say higher and lower, because then it comes in a manner where the Chachma has a whole lot of water pressure, let's say, and in the high pressure, and the Bina is much less pressure in the energy, and then so it goes down, diminished until the Malchus. But there are cases where we experience an unfiltered revelation of the spheres. So as we said earlier, the energies of the spheres are really in the soul itself. In the soul, you have all those potential spheres, but before they go into vessels. How do they emanate practically into the vessels? So there is a filter. Now, remember, we'll soon see why I'm using the word filter. The pure essential light, the essence of the spherot, the lights of the these essential energies, these powers of as they are in the essence of the soul, so to speak, get blocked, and then now it's going to emerge only in a measured way. Remember, we said kav. It's coming through a kav. It's coming through a kav amoded. It's coming through a measured manner. In the measured manner, the way the evolution of the human experience, which follows the divine experience into manifestation and into vessels, is that Chachma emerges first, and then Chachma carries within itself the seed of Bina, and Chachma kind of produces the Bina, and when they come out that way, each one is less than the other. You ever have these things that children play with? It's like plastic, where you have one cup, and then you can smash it, and then it's all flat, and then you can pull it out, and you have rings, one ring inside the other ring. It becomes imagine like a cup, like a plastic cup that you can collapse, where there's a bunch of rings. So let's say the upper ring is the Chachma, and then you pull it further, from there comes the Bina. From there, that's its evolution. That's its the regular, that's the post-Tzimtzum, that's the part after Tzimtzum, that's when they come out, and then the Chachma is higher, it's the upper rim, and the Malchus is at the bottom of the cup, and it's a much smaller, it gets narrow, it becomes like a cone. On the bottom, it's smaller and narrower. Okay. However, being that these powers are essential powers in the soul itself, if for whatever reason the filter is removed, and the soul exposes the powers not through the filter, but as it is in essence, then there is no higher and lower. Then all the spheros are equal in their intensity. What kind of an example for that is? It says that there are certain times that a person experiences an overwhelming supercharge in their soul. It's when the essence of their being is awakened and shooken up. Shooken up. It's in a state of, for example, a lot of times it's given the example of a person has one and only child, and it's the child's wedding. Imagine if imagine a couple that didn't have children for a long time. They finally had a child that they prayed and cried for it. And this child, and then let's say they waited a long time till they'll find the right match for their child. And finally, it's like the perfect match and and they're waiting. And at that wedding, It's such a deep moment in the life of the parent that the entire the inside of the human being emerges, that it never emerges at any other time. And then all their powers are equal. The mind, the emotions. It says you can have equal emotions and brilliant creativity and speech at the same time, and singing and dancing, and everything is all equal. There is this is called his galos koiches atzmiyim. When the powers of the essence, the kochos, as they are pre-filtered, non-filtered, then they, even though there are 10 powers, but they're equal in their intensity. Because it's only when they're emerging in a way to keep a person normal, not crazy. I mean, in a sense, when in such a situation, you're crazy, a good crazy, but it's still crazy. To be a normal human being, to be able to function and live in this world, Hashem set us up with a system of filtration. And as the filter system works, then it comes out in an oifen mesuder, in a lined up way, and the lights go into vessels. In that sense, the chachma is higher than the bina, and the bina is higher than the, and the light gets diminished. And that's what he's adding over here. When the light and the revelation is equal in all the spheres, even though these are essentially different spheres. Not only are they different, but there is a beginning and an end. In other words, we're not dismissing the fact that Chachma is called the head and Malchus is called the leg or the end. However, and you would have to understand, why is that? Why then is it Rosh and Sof? What makes it Rosh and Sof? Okay. Now, by the way, this idea that in essence they're also called Rosh v'Sof, we're going to have more explanation on that, Ezra Hashem, in the next chapter. Not only the next chapter, we're going to have a nice long discussion on this in the next few chapters. But for now, he says it's still Rosh v'Sof, it's still beginning and end, but Ein Zeh b'Bchinas Ma'ala Mata. What it's not is not called higher and lower. Why? Because the higher and lower factor is how much light, how much energy of pure soul is shining in it. So when they're coming out in a manner where one follows the other, so the first koach that comes directly as number one, emerging from the soul, the first revelation. Again, that happens when it's filtered. So then the chachma emerges first. So chachma is closer to the source. So there's more light shining in chachma. Bina is already an evolution, the next stage. So you're going already farther from the source. So the light gets diminished. So now that's called, and therefore it's called the lower level. And in the emotions, the light gets even diminished even more, and the malchus even more. But he says, when they're all coming out in one shot, which means if they're all emanating as they are in the essence, then they're not considered higher and lower. For example, when the kochos atzmi, when the essential powers of the soul, earlier we spoke about sfirot, but now he's referring to in the human experience, when the kochos atzmiyim come out, even though the mochen and essence are in a higher level of midos, we'll soon understand what that means. They're in a higher level of the emotions. Be'etzem, not because there's more light. That's Maila Mata, high and low. He's saying is be'ikr, where there is more light. But if you remove that consideration, like when there's no more light at one level, when all the light of the soul is equal in all the experiences, because they're coming out without a filter, and they're all equally charged with the entire self, with the entire energy of the soul itself. Even though they're still be'etzem, the mochen is still be'etzem in a madrega elyon amamida. So that needs to be understood. What does that mean? But it's not because more light. It's because it's a higher quality. But that we're going to leave that for next chapter. In as much as the consideration that we're considering now, which is what's making something be ma'ila mata, higher and lower, kiruv and richuk, being close or being distant, and what's making kiruv and richuk, the fact that they're emerging in Seder Ishtalshalos, they're emerging in a systemized manner of evolution, then the cause of the upper and the lower is more light and less light. right? But when you don't have that, and you have koiches atzmi, and the ma'achash oiden ev shemei ben b'shava, ein zeh b'bchinas ma'ir lamata. This is not considered high and low. And the same is also above. And to give an example where you had something like that, where everything was just as intense and there was no order. And what happens is you have total chaos in a situation like this. It's okay for a quick moment in your life, but in as I said earlier, to function as a normal human being in this world, there has to be system, there has to be order, there has to be. So he says, in the world of chaos, where the spheros came out, the essential powers of the spheros came out as they are in the essence of the Or Ein Sof, not filtered and not diminished and not measured. Then there was no be higher and lower, and there was a lot of, and that caused a lot of clashing, and a lot of ultimately that world had to collapse. As stated elsewhere. Okay. I'm going to leave the kitzer of this for the next class because we're already over time. And as Hashem, we're going to start next week, chapter 38, which I'm very excited because it's going to get really some really deep stuff coming up, if this is not deep enough. But I enjoyed it today. Yesterday, I'd spent like an hour really going through the next few chapters, and it was really enlightening. So excited for what's coming. All right, everyone. So we finished chapter 37, Mazel Tov, and Bez Hashem, next class can be in chapter 38.